McIntosh's community webinar for this month. I hope that everyone can hear me quite well. If you can't, if you can't hear me. Can someone please indicate that they can hear me, perhaps in the chat box? It'd be great. Great, thanks very much.
Hear you.
Great, thank you. So as always, some few logistics before we get started. If we can keep ourselves on mute for good audio, that would be wonderful, because we are recording the webinar today. If you do have any questions as we go through, please feel free to use the chat box. I'll be keeping an eye on that and ensure that any questions raised there get surfaced for our presenter. If you have any IT challenges, drop Laura an email and she'll be able to help you. And of course, as always, the deck, the recording and the transcript of our chat will be on the portal after the call. So for today, I'm really, really pleased that we have Yvonne McIntosh joining us today for her webinar about her experiences and her journey, her culture journey at Genworth. Yvonne's the head of learning and OD at Genworth, and Yvonne, we originally had your webinar scheduled for a few months ago, but you were unwell. So I'm very happy that you're able to join us this month to share your experiences and your journey. So I will hand over to you, Yvonne, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your webinar.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for having me, everyone. I'm really excited to share what I have experienced and learned in the journey over the last 3 years at leading culture transformation at Genworth. So it's been a 3-year journey, so a fair bit has happened, and a fair bit has been learned on my part, and everyone else has been involved. So really excited to share, and I'm really excited to hear some of your thoughts on it, get your questions on it. Because I've been living and breathing this for 3 years, I might take things for granted, or I might have missed something, and I think this community asks such fabulous questions that I can only learn from that as well. So really looking forward to that. Let's make sure that I can get to the next slide. And I'm a little bit frozen at the moment, which doesn't help. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, so I've chosen to build this around culture, structural, social, and individual levers, this whole case study, because what has become really obvious to me over the last 3 years is how those three things, those three levers, really reinforce each other, and how if one wasn't there, the whole thing wouldn't have worked as well as it has. So, yeah, really want to stand back and reflect and share some of those things. So what I'm planning to do is to really do this in 3 stages. The first thing is I want to give you a brief introduction to Genworth, to why we've embarked on this change journey and what it is that we're aiming to achieve, and then give you in 3 stages an overview of the things that we have done, and then really stand back and look at the learning around that, and then really looking forward to getting into a conversation around some of those things. So that's the plan. I'm going to be pausing after each of those stages and take the questions or comments. Apart from that, I don't think I'll be looking at the chat too much, because I think it might be a bit too distracting. So if there's anything that I've missed or that you want to have raised and I'm not stopping, then Terry's got full license to jump in and stop me. Okay, so let's have a look. Who is Genworth? Genworth is the Australian market leader in mortgage insurance. We're an ASX-listed company. We listed in 2014 on the stock exchange. We used to belong to a multinational called Genworth Financial, headquartered in the US. They are now our majority shareholder. Genworth has a market cap of about 1.5 billion, and we have about 250 people in Australia. So moving a whole lot of money with not a whole lot of heads, which is a great thing for someone who's driving culture, because you can really see the impact of anything that you do. So it's been amazing to see how things have landed that we've done in the culture space. So why has Genworth embarked on this culture work? The main reason really is that we needed to shift our strategy. Genworth is more than 50 years old. We've been doing very profitable business for more than 50 years, selling essentially one product in one market with very little competition, and that is rapidly changing. There's more competition, the customer demand is shifting, and we really had to adapt our strategy in order to go with where the market is going and where customer demand is going and how the dynamics in the market are playing out. So what we are doing and what we have had to do is to look at how can we offer more flexible ways of doing business with us. So how do we provide risk and capital management solutions, of which mortgage insurance is one, but not the only one? How can we provide those solutions that our customers want? Now, our customers are the financial institutions, so if you're taking out a loan and you have less than 20% deposit, then you most likely have to take out mortgage insurance, and that's what we do. And we are insuring the banks against the loss should you default on your mortgage. So more ways of doing business, moving from a commodity, a product provider, to becoming a strategic partner with our customers, and working much more closely and in partnership for mutual benefit. That's the journey. The ease of doing business has been a great thing. There's a lot more automation, digitization that's been going on, and different ways to price our business as well. So lots more flexibility, and it really has made it obvious that we need to step up culturally in order to be able to pull that off, and to really be seen as that partner. So that's a huge shift for us. So now, last year, another element came into the mix, which is the APRA inquiry into CBA. We also had the Royal Commission, of course, into the financial sector. We are part of that industry. We were asked to undertake a self-assessment of our culture that was provided to the regulator, APRA. And ever since then, the board has taken an extra strong interest in our culture, as they should. So there's another element here. It certainly wasn't the driving element, and we certainly got good marks from APRA for being well on our journey already, so well ahead of the game in that regard. We've had some successes as well. I'm very proud of the shift in our engagement scores that we've been able to achieve within 18 months. We had an uplift of 11%. From 58 to 69% organization-wide, which was huge. We're about to do another survey too to see where we stand now. So that's been the driver for all this work. And here's what we are focusing on. The Adaptive Cultures Framework has been a huge help for us, and continues to be a huge help for us in mapping out the pathway and where we want to be and what do we need to focus on. So we certainly came from compliant dependent. 3 years ago, that's definitely where we were. We want to be at collaborative growth, and I would say we are somewhere close to achievement right now. So whenever I ask that question, and I ask that question quite a lot at the moment, I ask people, where do you think we are? They're putting themselves closer to an achievement culture. Still more work to be done, but we certainly have shifted. Now, what you see on the right-hand side there are the things that we are working on that we feel are the foundations for our business being able to move towards that collaborative growth. And it really boils down to three things. One of them is taking ownership and seeing things through. The next one is creating a safe environment where everyone can speak up and contribute their perspective. And the last one is to be able to build the capacity to embrace complex challenges. So that is what we want to achieve. Let me just stop there and see any questions up to this point before I shift into what it is that we've done around that. Not at this stage, by the looks of it.
Yvonne, it's Andrew.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you look at on the right-hand side, the key things that need to happen for the culture to move forward, how did you identify those?
Yeah, so we started, and maybe this is the next step, and I'll answer this by going to the next slide. The first thing we did was to clarify new expectations. So we said it's time to refresh our values. So the senior leadership team had a conversation around, okay, this is where we are culturally, where do we need to be? And it boils down to these values: integrity, rethink the everyday, one team, own it, and focus on your customer. So that's where we started. And then it was really through exploration, conversations, guidance from yourself, Andrew, and Alison, not the least, to boil it down to what sits underneath it that really allows a lot of this to happen. And we found that time and time again, we came back to, well, we need people to take ownership and drive things. Otherwise there will be no innovation. We need, or customer, like reliable customer focus. We need people to be able to feel safe to speak up, and that certainly wasn't the case across the business when we started out here. Because if we don't do that, we'd have no hope in really embracing complex problems, because we need multiple perspectives. So it just seemed like if we look at the values and who we want to be and how we want to be, it always came back to those underlying foundational things that really had to be in place for any of this to be possible. So that's how that evolved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to continue on and see where the questions will pop up. So as I said, values first. The next thing we did was around all those what I almost consider hygiene factors. We have a dialogue with all employees around the values. They actually landed really well. People intuitively embraced them. We had very little cynicism or pushback around that. It just seemed to work. Aligning the performance management and reward systems, and then also starting to look at recruitment. Who are we recruiting? How do we make sure we get the right people into the organization? And how do we onboard them? That actually happened a little bit later. It's not completely chronological here. If I had to say what's the biggest thing from this very structural slide here, it would have to be the recruitment. Recruitment is huge. Seeing the impact of a couple of key leader recruits who we started to recruit not for cultural fit, but for cultural contribution, made a huge difference. So what we said was, well, we need to recruit people who are culturally ahead of us and get them to help us on this mission to move the whole business forward. And that is what we've done. We've recruited some fabulous people into the organization, and we've paired them up when they start with a culture buddy. So that is someone who is really brought into the culture work, who can explain it really well, and whose mission it is to help the new recruit to navigate what are the behaviors and the mindsets that we want to enable and encourage and nourish, and what are the behaviors and mindsets we want to move forward and basically make unsafe to keep having, so that it's easier for them to know, okay, I might hit some resistance here, but I'm empowered to push through that, rather than having them conform the moment they run into some resistance. So we found that's an extremely valuable thing to do, because knowing myself what it's like to join an organization, and you kind of feel out the lay of the land and you kind of try to work out, what's accepted around here and what's not. And the last thing we wanted is for these people to to let go of that edge that had attracted us to them in the first place. But we also didn't want them to get frustrated when they could see that some of the things that they wanted to do weren't immediately working, and they had some backup support, way to debrief that to make sense of the experience. So that is and continues to be working really well. So let me stop here. No, let me just go on and give you one more. If I go to second base, leadership development is the next thing that we land into. So I think this has been probably the most powerful thing that we've done. And I think the reason it's been so powerful is because we immersed our top 2 layers of leaders in the culture conversation, so that it wasn't just something that happened on the periphery, but it was very much present in the organization from the start. So we had 3 leadership programs going at the same time. Anything we did around leadership development and that we have done over the last 3 years is completely aligned with where we want to be culturally. So the clear message is, if you join this leadership program, then you're going to get a huge amount out of it for yourself and your own personal growth, and we're expecting you to help shape and create the culture that we aspire to. So both of that is very front of mind and was a clear expectation right from the start. So we had our senior leadership team on a program that worked on how effective they were as a team, as well as how they faced into the organization. We had an intensive, immersive year-long program for leaders reporting to the senior leadership team. So we've been having 3 cohorts of them go through now. That's a year-long program that has had massive impact in terms of the way that group of leaders interact with each other, the way they think, the way they've grown as leaders, and the way that they've helped to change the culture. I think that's probably been one of the most powerful things we've done. And then also there's quarterly leadership forums that include the top 2 layers of the organization. So where we spend 2 to 3 hours with them every quarter. And at first they were very much focused on culture. Now I think we've got a mix of culture and business to show that, well, culture is never there in isolation. It's really, culture is always there to support business outcomes. That's a message that we've been basically using the whole way through. So here are some of the things that have, I think, made this work really well. The immersive leadership program, especially, but also the other ones, have been very adaptive, and that probably sums it up. Not a lot of content. It's really been deep vertical development. It's been about building capacity to grow on the maturity scale, certainly towards self-authoring and beyond, building capacity for complexity, giving people also practical tools, having feedback conversations that took the tension, interpersonal tension out of the dynamics. You can imagine a business that is on this kind of journey. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of high expectations, and there are a lot of people who had to do things they've never done before. So it's a recipe for a pressure cooker situation, which it certainly was, and sometimes still is. And being able to have conversations that remove misunderstandings, that get people on the same page has been absolutely critical and has made a massive difference, taken a lot of sideshows and distractions out of the business, make people more productive. We've been able to involve our board members. They understand what the journey is that we're on. We're actually at the moment recruiting for a new CEO, and the board leads this recruitment and they are very clear that they are recruiting a CEO that can continue this journey, someone who is a good people leader, who's a good listener, who understands where we want to go as an organization. So it's just really great to know that at this point, after 3 years, the culture work is so embedded that we don't have to really worry too much that a new CEO is going to come in and change everything, because we know that the board has this front of mind, which is a really great position to be in.
Yvonne, it's Terry here. Anne has a question wanting to know a little bit more about some of the critical elements of the leadership program that really worked well for you. And on top of that, I'm also curious to know, how did the leaders respond to the accountability that you gave them? You know, from what you've said, you have responsibility here. So can you talk to us a little bit about that, and also some of those critical elements of the program that really worked well?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would love to. So I think what worked really well is that we combined, and we had great guidance and facilitation here from Alison and Andrew on this journey, and when we're now getting more and more independent around this. But I think what worked so magically well is the combination of the amenity to change work, which is very much deep personal work, which drew people in personally, with conversations and learnings around how do I improve the relationship and the effectiveness of working with other people. So how do I have these difficult conversations in a way that isn't as difficult as it might otherwise be? What does it mean to hold multiple perspectives and all those things? So these are all things that they weren't taught how to behave. We didn't go and say, okay, this is how we want you all to behave now. We got them to co-create that. And I think that's really the secret sauce to all of this. These are very intelligent people. It was never going to work to put a program in front of them that says, here's how we want you all to behave now, and these are the behaviors and so on. We said to them, we started with the business imperative, and we said, this is where the business needs to go. What does that mean for our leadership? For you as leaders, how do you need to lead? And I think that was the key, combined with the personal work that we helped support them on all the way through. I think that's the combination that really made it work. Now, I think the other thing that made it work was that it was a year-long program. We had 3 workshops. We still have 3 workshops. And we catch up with them in a small group setting once a month. So we have group coaching sessions where people report in on, here's how I'm going with my immunity work. They get more guidance around that. Here's what I've implemented from the last workshop. So we have further conversations that deepen the understanding, and as well as providing an accountability mechanism. Now, that didn't work magically from the start. And yeah, I think what essentially made it work is that I had to have a couple of crucial conversations, and I was the one leading these coaching sessions. And it did happen at first that some people turned up and they hadn't done the work. You know how often people go to leadership programs and have the best of intentions to implement all these things, and then they come back and two weeks later, it's too hard, or they've implemented only a fraction of that. And that just wasn't good enough. And we made that very clear right from the beginning that wasn't good enough. And it was basically up to me to have some of those conversations in the group, as well as at times one-on-one, around the standard that we set for this. Now we have a process where people get that in writing. So it's very compliance dependent. We say to them, here's what you're signing up for. We invite them. We don't nominate them. We say, look, we would like to invite you to consider this program. We give them an information session and say, here's what's involved. And then when they apply, we get them to basically sign a form that says, here are the expectations. By applying, you are committing to doing this. And that makes it easier now for me to hold them to it. And I've actually, since the start of the program, I've had to ask 2 people to leave the program because they weren't living up to those expectations. So we're very strict on those standards. And that works now quite easily because this program is extremely popular in the business. I have inquiries 6 months in advance, people wanting to do it. And people are getting great success. It's very successful. We've had a huge success rate of people being able to demonstrate behavior change at the end of a year, validated by a 360 retest, as well as specific feedback on their development goal that they had set themselves for the year. So it's successful. We published a lot of these success stories so everyone could read them. And people saw their colleagues change in the workplace and wanted a piece of it. So they proactively started to say to their manager, I want to be considered for this program. So there's a huge pull factor, which is what I always wanted to create, a pull factor so that we didn't have to ever push anything onto someone, but we could start a true movement from within by people saying, I want to be a part of this. There's something cool going on here and I want to be a part of it.
Yvonne?
Makes sense? Yeah.
Makes beautiful sense. If you were to write a job description for the qualities of the person who's in your role, which is necessary to enable this to happen in an organisation, what are the qualities of that person?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I've been on a huge journey myself over these 3 years. So I think number one would be you've got to be up for the same journey. You've got to be up for constant self-reflection and development yourself. You've got to embrace the idea of passionate non-attachment. That's certainly something I had to learn. I think truly someone who sees leadership as bringing people together to co-create something. Someone who is not in an expert mindset, but someone who is truly in that sort of inclusive leadership, adaptive leadership mindset. At the same time, someone who can hold their own and have the tough conversations when it needs to happen. Someone who is flexible in how do I approach a tricky situation? Is this a situation where I go and have a direct conversation? Is this a conversation where someone else needs to have a conversation? I need to somehow help them to see that they need to have one. I think it also needs to be someone who is willing to deal with criticism and maybe some not so positive reactions. I certainly have had those as well. And 3 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to face that. Defensiveness, people letting out because might have hit a sore point, all those things, not in a really dramatic bad way, but it happens. And I don't think someone needs to have the ability to deal with all that on day one. I think what is most important is that someone is on that learning journey with the rest of the organization. And so, yeah, that's what comes to mind at the moment.
Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, anything else around the leadership piece before I move on? I might just move on, looking at time. Okay, so third base. We focus heavily on leaders to start with, and it's really mid last year and very much this year that we started to focus on, okay, we need to get everyone involved. Now, from the beginning, the expectation on our leaders was that they get their teams involved and that they have conversations, that they pass on some of their learning. And in some places that has been happening more so than others. So now what we're doing, and I'm jumping straight to point 3 here, sorry, it's probably so front of mind because I'm right in the middle of it right now. We're doing leader-led culture all-in sessions. So we call them all-in sessions because we're saying everyone's got to be in on it now. So there are a couple of concepts, methodologies, ways of thinking that have been passed on to leaders in these leadership programs, and we're saying we want everyone to have this, and we want everyone to have the opportunity to co-create this culture journey that we're on. So what we're doing at the moment is running sessions department by department. And when I say running sessions, that's actually really selling it a bit short, because really we're starting a culture movement within departments, starting with saying to the leadership team and the head of that department, where do you want to and need to take the culture in your team in order to play your role in making this business successful? So each senior leader then defines what their particular strategy is around culture. And then we work with the leadership team towards running a session that is mostly leader-led, and we get them to own what it is that needs to happen within their function, and I support them just in running and facilitating it, because often, we have a room full of 50 or 60 people there, and then really holding them accountable for following it up. So it's an ongoing journey, and we're setting them up by running these sessions, but really the expectation is that the leadership team now takes this forward and continues the conversation and builds it into their business rhythms going forward. So people will have individual commitments that come out of these sessions, people will make team commitments that come out of these sessions, and the leadership team is tasked with moving that forward. So that's huge. That's creating a whole new level of energy in the organization. There is an accountability mechanism for this at the senior leadership table. The CEO has said, I want you all to commit to this, I want it all booked in, and I want you to report back what you've learned once you've had those sessions. So that's what they do. Once the sessions happened, they talk about what happened, what came out of it, what did they learn, and what are they planning to do going forward. So that's been huge. The other things that we've done here are some skill building to really support a new way of working, human-centered design, customer partnerships. So that's an extension of this collaborative growth mindset towards how do we work with customers, externals, and that's something we're starting to lean into now. That's under development. And of course, some cross-functional teamworks, and this is cross-functional teams consisting of leaders from across the business who put their hand up and say, I want to help with this, who've then recruited people from across the business, across the hierarchies, up and down, really quite a mix of people have come together to help with projects around recruitment, onboarding, communication of progress, reinvigorating an awards program. So a couple of projects that we felt were important at the time to really start to embed this culture so it becomes an asset that stays with the organization rather than something that sits with a bunch of leaders, and when they leave and new people come in, then it waters everything down. So that's where the structural is so important. So look at recruitment, onboarding, induction, ongoing communication, performance management, all those things really, really critical, and making sure that it's not just a fleeting change, it's not just a state, but a stage. in the development of the organization. So that's the third base. Let me just pause here for a moment and see if there are any questions.
Yvonne, it's Terry here. You mentioned that the CEO has asked the leaders to report back about what they've learned as they've run these leader-led culture sessions, which I think is really interesting, because they're not there to accept learning, they're there to facilitate the group, and obviously they learn from that. What are some of the things that they've reported back that they have learned as they've taken responsibility for running such culture sessions?
Yeah, I think so. Often I'm not in the room when that happens, so I can just go by what I heard from my manager who is in the room. Some of the learnings have been around barriers that get in the way. Interestingly, oftentimes the barriers are structural, and it's actually not that hard to do something about it. So, for example, our operations group, they were asked, okay, what we want you to do is, if you see a problem, act on it and see it through, and don't put it at the leadership team's door and say, here you go, over to you, now you deal with it. We want you to deal with it. And when we gave them time to explore what might be barriers to that, well, I'm being measured on productivity. If I'm being measured on productivity and you're now asking me to do these extra things, I'm going to be penalized for that. So some of these things I think were underestimated before we put that message out there, and they were very practical barriers that we could quite easily remove. Another insight was another department, just how hierarchical the thinking was in that department, and then reflections on, okay, well, what do we need to do to change that? So, yeah, I think those are some examples of what some of those learnings are.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So now if we stand back from all this and going back to the title of this presentation, I've attempted to order them a little bit here into structural, social, and individual, and you can see it's actually not that easy, because a lot of the things that we're doing have multiple elements to them. A leadership program in particular, of course, I think a leadership program would not have worked without the individual component. It also wouldn't have had the impact that it had without the social component of encouraging crucial conversations. It wouldn't have had the impact without the regular coaching sessions, which actually surprised me how effective they've been. Now, on the structural side, there were a few surprises that came out of the woodworks when we said to people, we want you to work in a human-centered design way. We want you to be more customer-centric. We want you to think more critical of the whole complex problem rather than just going into action mode and solving it straight away. There was an almighty clash with the way that we manage projects and do budgets. So there was a barrier that came up which was perceived as insurmountable, and it really largely was a structural thing. Having said that, digging a bit deeper, there were also some mindset issues around that we needed to shift, where people again came up against this, there's someone high up in the hierarchy who won't like this. So not everything was structural, even though in the first instance it looked structural. So it really pays to have a very close look at what some of those barriers are. I think one of the most important questions that we ask in these group workshops is, what are the barriers to making this happen? And it's just surprising what comes out sometimes. The other interesting thing is that the capability issue comes up again and again. So I think prior to introducing human-centered design, people got the idea of, okay, we need to approach problems differently, but how the heck do we do that? So we really had to introduce some skills around that. And I think the same thing is going to be true once we introduce some skill building around project management, budgeting and planning and all those things, and bring some more rigor to that. I think it will also go some way to solve some issues that currently look like social issues, but they're actually capability issues. So it's just really interesting to see how those things are intertwined and how one doesn't go with the other. You've really got to look at all three of them if you want to make effective change. So I'll be pausing here for a moment to see any thoughts on that. If you look at that, any observations or questions when you look at this whole structure?
Yvonne, it's Terry here again. Do you talk about this structural, social, individual categorisation, if you like, with your leaders, or is this something that you just manage, if you like, in the background? And do the leaders appreciate the importance of these three different areas or levers in cultural transformation?
I don't actually talk to them about it. It's always in the back of my mind, and it's become a way of looking at what's going on for me. I wouldn't say I use that in everyday language. I think at the moment, people have enough to get their head around just getting used to what is adaptive and what's the difference between adaptive and technical. So some of those more fundamental things that's where I'm keen to get some language settled. You know, what's the difference between complex and complicated? So we do talk about that quite overtly. When it comes to some of these things, not so much. It's more a way for me to diagnose what's going on and point some things out to them.
Mm-hmm. And Mike's just asked whether you looked at structural, social and individual enablers as well as some of the barriers.
Yes, definitely. So if I look at how we're setting up the rollout across the organisation right now, the fact that there are commitments to be made at the end of the session and that they are then integrated into the business rhythm of the department, and we quite deliberately look at, okay, what is your business rhythm and what will work best for you? That's one way that we use the structural in order to keep the individual and social progression going. So that's definitely one. I also, to some extent, I use whatever influence I have to look at, when there are structural changes being discussed in terms of organizational structure, how can we align certain parts of the business better so that they have more impact on how the whole system needs to move forward. For example, around managing budgets, managing projects and so on. So how do you look at organizational structure in order to move the agenda forward? So that's definitely front of mind for me, but not just for me. I mean, the beautiful thing is that I'm not an island here. I'd like to think that I've done a fair bit to get this whole journey moving into a positive direction. And this is much bigger than me, this whole thing. My whole HR team is involved. The senior leaders are on this journey. The cohorts that have gone through the leadership program are on this journey. So we have really good critical mass now to keep things moving, and I'm certainly not the only one who looks at that. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so if I go and share some of my learnings with you, then, you know, feel free to jump in here and see what might come to mind for you. So I've already talked about recruitment. I think that is a really, really important one. Go for culture contribution rather than culture fit. Look how you can attract people that are already ahead of you on the journey, and then try to work out how can you prevent them from getting frustrated. How can you enlist them on your mission to move things forward? Don't rely on the top. Don't rely on the senior leaders to move everything forward. I think one thing that's worked really well for us is just to humanize our senior leaders and say, they're learning with us. They're not perfect. Everyone's learning. Everyone's on this journey. And our CEO frequently comes into leadership programs in the first workshop and shares her own journey and her own immunity map for everyone to see. And it's quite a vulnerable moment, and people really appreciate it. So we are not relying on our senior leaders to move us there. Of course, they have a role to play, and we have a huge movement from within now that is helping them to drive things forward. And I think that is absolutely key. Often you get, and we got this at the start too, people saying, oh, you know, I'm going to do something different when I see my boss doing something different. And we really made a big effort to change that mindset around, well, what can you do to influence your boss doing something differently? So, you know, we're all leaders here, and you've signed up for this journey. So what can you do, and how does that help you to develop as a person? I think what we've underestimated is coaching. I would think that if we had invested earlier in more executive coaching, we probably could have accelerated the whole journey. Now, that's not always possible, and for us, that just wasn't possible at that time. I play that role with people in the leadership program a lot, and they now also have relationships with each other. So it's not all coming to me, but they're helping each other. Having said that, if I had the chance to do everything over again, maybe another organization, other circumstances, I would certainly push for more investment in executive coaching, because I think it's a huge accelerator. Building coalitions of the willing and able is critical, because changing culture is, and I'm sure you all notice, I'm not telling you anything new here, it's a huge, huge job, and it is actually really exciting when you can get to a point where the movement is happening without you, because you can just get so much more done. So I can now put the call out into the business and say, hey, you know, I want to do this. Who would like to be part of creating something around that? And I get people putting up their hand and saying, okay, I'm in. So it's a huge part. And I think it works because I have learned to let go of needing to have things my way, needing to be the expert in the room. And I have learned to just put an idea out there, bring some people together, and then guide them a little bit in order to create something. So really giving the work back to the people is huge here. Picking the sweet spot between focusing on leaders and focusing on everyone, that has been a challenge. There's a bit of a catch-22 situation. If you try to reach everyone at the same time too early, it can be counterproductive, because leaders aren't as bought in yet, and that's not as advanced in their journey to be able to support everyone. I think what is working well for us now is that we've invested a lot in leaders, and leaders can now really lead this from the front with some support. At the same time, maybe we could have made things happen quicker had we started involving everyone earlier. Another reflection on my part is the two-way communication with the CEO and the senior leaders is extremely important. And again, I think I probably could have done more on that front, and will certainly do more with a new CEO coming in. The senior, you know, getting having a senior leadership team bought in for 3 years in a row into this culture journey is actually quite a special thing from what I can gather from other practitioners and other organizations who are tearing their hair out, because as soon as the crisis hits, something changes or a leader changes and the whole journey changes. So I've been very privileged here. And I think feeding the senior leaders good news stories, anecdotes about what has changed and how it's changed, and making sure you've got a robust way to measure progress in place is really, really important, because they will not see what you see. They will not see the changes quickly. They will not see all the small changes that you see when you're part of the journey. They will look at results and outcomes, and there may be a lag effect, and stuff ups will happen, and they will say, well, what's happened with all this culture work? So I think feeding them progress stories all the time is really important. And then we've talked about the personal evolution, which I think is absolutely critical for success in all of this. Okay, enough talking. I think I've talked for way too long. Questions, observations?
It's you haven't talked for far too long, Yvonne. It's been really fascinating. Andrew had a question, whether you have had any experience or can share any observations of people, like new recruits coming in who may not have been able to make that cultural contribution, or perhaps have been a good cultural fit. What impact has that had?
That is challenging. It's challenging. It is actually not easy, I think, to recruit people who fit the bill of your aspiration 100%. Sometimes they bring some elements of it, and we love those elements, and we might overlook some other things that might actually be more counterproductive. So to me, about a year into this journey, it felt a bit like you let the genie out of the bottle and you can't put it back in, and things just start to get lost their own, run away from you. People behave in ways, and it maybe you recruit, so maybe people who've been here a while, things blow up. And once you've put high expectations out there around this is the culture we aspire to, this is what we all want to live up to, and then a new leader comes in and doesn't behave that way, or an old leader under pressure suddenly behaves in a way that is not in line with that, it really creates a problem, because people get very disappointed, and narratives start to happen that make the rounds in the organization. It's quite surprising how quickly bad news spread in the organization. And then what? Then really it's everyone's watching how the leaders of these people are dealing with it. So it's a challenge, and it's happening. I don't think there's any organization where that's not happening. Just got to do your best to contain it. And I think also sometimes there's a bit of a reality check involved for the people who then start to criticize what's going on, because often people jump on, well, see, this person's not doing this, without seeing the whole context, without knowing the whole story, and without having done anything themselves to try and help. And I think that's a great learning opportunity then for everyone who is around this person. Say, well, this is a moment of unconditional responsibility. What are you going to do to make it better? So there can be a learning point in that, and I think that's always the best way to see how, what can we learn from this? What can we do? It's everyone's responsibility.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yvonne, I love your description there. It's a really useful anecdote of how the culture shifted when a person comes in or a person reverts to old behaviours, and people say, hey, that's not what we're expecting. So
yeah.
That's actually a demonstration that we're sensitised to the culture that we want, the culture that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, And we're now seeing these
Yeah.
things as exceptions or outside of boundaries of acceptability, whereas before they potentially just would have been, that's how that person is.
Yeah. And there would have been water cooler talk and disengagement, whereas now people are starting to talk about it. What can we do about that? Who's going to do something about that? And I've often been in a room where I said, what are you doing about it? You know, people often come to me then and say, what are we going to do? And I said, what are you going to do? So, you know, I think that's a learning point. It's just the same as someone saying to me just yesterday, oh, you know that workshop that we ran a week ago, I felt it was a bit rushed in the afternoon. And I said, okay, I didn't hear you speak up about that. Who did we say was the workshop? You know, so there's learning points everywhere here. And I think one of the great things that I've learned over this journey is to just try and find the learning for that person who comes and says this is wrong, you know, without sounding defensive. So,
and it's a lovely loop back to the beginning of your presentation where you talked about one of the things that needed to shift was this accountability and people wanting to speak up, and that's what you're starting to see,
yeah.
which is great.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, if I look at the structural element to this, I've stopped doing feedback surveys. I still do surveys after sessions, actually more so than I have done before, but I don't do feedback surveys anymore. I do impact surveys. I want to know what impact have we had. So I ask questions about what people learned, what are they going to do, and so on, but I no longer ask about what did you think of the workshop. Because it's not my workshop, it's their workshop. Or it's, you know, it's their session, a team session, whatever it is.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. We've run out of time, but there was a question, I think, from Mike around the recruiting piece. So let's move that conversation to the portal where we will upload your slides and also the presentation. So thank you again, Yvonne. So interesting. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And enjoy the rest of your day. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Yvonne. That was fantastic.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Yvonne. That was great. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.